Square Enix continues the retro collection train with the collection of SaGa, Final Fantasy Legend on the Nintendo Switch. The SaGa Collection brings together a series of decades-old games to give new players a look at the roots of this historic mobile franchise. After spending time completing this collection, I'm pleased to say that the experience holds up and can still be a lot of fun, even if the bundle itself is rather bare bones. We begin things with the original SaGa title, known in the West as the Final Fantasy Legend, which was released in 1989 in Japan and 1990 in the West on the original Gameboy. In this world, a tower exists that is said to take those who manage to climb it to paradise. Your band of 4 adventurers, composed of individuals you choose, is the next party that attempts the challenge. Your quest will take you through different worlds, each based on the various elements, such as a sky world in the clouds or an ocean world with small islands amid a giant sea. All of this culminating in your team of 4 making it to the top to fight a final boss. Compared to today's titles, it's light on narrative. However, when put into perspective of when this game came out and that it was the first portable RPG video game, what Final Fantasy Legend manages to accomplish is impressive. The second title, released in the West in 1991, retains most of the features from the first. That said, the areas where Final Fantasy Legend 2 improves the most is with the story. Featuring named side characters and a more fleshed out story, your team of 4 is now out to stop a force of gods from retrieving all the pieces of Magi, mystical artifacts that are said to form the goddess Isis and grant godhood when all are together. Unfortunately, doing so seems to also be causing the world to become unstable and wreaking havoc. Once more, your quest will take you through various worlds, but this time with different themes as opposed to elements. Each one fairly different from the last, from an ancient Japan-themed world to a post-apocalyptic cityscape. The third and final game in the collection is 1993's Final Fantasy Legend 3, or SaGa 3, which sees the biggest departure in terms of gameplay. The first 2 entries rely far more on randomized elements, more on this in a bit, but Legends 3 feels much more like your traditional RPG. It features mechanics like MP, experience points, gaining levels, and weapons having a set number of uses similar to those in Fire Emblem games have been removed, which were in the previous 2 games. You also begin the game with a set party as opposed to composing one from various race choices. These changes give it more of a traditional console Final Fantasy feel than simply a spin-off using the series name. Story-wise, elements and themes are out this time. Instead, you'll be jumping across time, changing fate, and the events to prevent the drowning of the world. The side characters have continued to develop and improve, and while not nearly on par with their console RPG cousins, they're still leaps and bounds more fleshed out than the first game's offerings. Whereas many RPGs may provide you with a set of ragtag characters to take with you on your quest, Legends games ask you to create your party from a range of different races including human, mutant, translated from the Esper in Japanese, monsters, and in SaGa 2 you even get robots. In the first 2 games, each race gains stats in various ways. For instance, the mutants have a chance to randomly gain stats and learn or forget spells and abilities at random after each battle. In Legend 1, humans only gain stats when you use specific items on them, but in Legend 2, they gain stats in a similar vein as mutants. Robots in Legends 2 improve their stats depending on what gear they have equipped. And lastly is the monster class that don't gain stats at all, but instead, you're able to evolve them by eating meat and various remains of enemies that have a chance to drop after encounters. By consuming these items, the creature will evolve into a new form from a pool of possible types, each with its own abilities and stats. In Legend 3, this evolution and changing mechanic was expanded to your human party members as well. The more I played these Legend games, the more I came to appreciate the variety that each race presented. I found myself thinking about how fun it could be to play a specific type or party, like all humans, or how crazy things could get with a party of only monsters. I appreciate that the different races mix up the gameplay, that it's not just whether or not they can learn a type of spell or are good with a certain weapon. My biggest gripe with this collection has to do in part with the various methods that the races use to level up, but not because I think they're flawed. These games all come from an era where instruction books were packed in would feature critical information that is needed to understand the game, This was done in an effort to save space on the cartridges. Heck, the first game's manual was almost 80 pages of important detail. This collection contains none of that information. This is frankly unacceptable. They didn't have to include scans of the original manuals, but some type of tutorial or information is needed. The offerings in the collection of SaGa Final Fantasy Legend are scant when compared to many of the retro game collections that are out there today. But it's also priced lower than most too, at only $20. What you get are all 3 games in both their Japanese and English versions, a handful of different borders, a slightly updated localization, the Colt is now just called Pistol as an example, an auto quick save system that will keep your progress if you close the game, and a speed up feature. These additions are nice and may be welcomed by some, but anyone hoping for an art gallery or filters, or hoping for perhaps even the remade DS versions will have to look elsewhere. For the $20 price, the collection of SaGa Final Fantasy Legend is still a fun bundle of games that serve as a wonderful time capsule for handheld RPG adventures. Players can once again easily experience Square's very first million-unit seller with the Final Fantasy Legend, and hear the surprisingly great tracks these games bust out. If you're a fan of old-school RPGs, I highly recommend you check out the collection of SaGa Final Fantasy Legend.